believe it or not, I spend a lot of my time watching atheist videos, not just for the sake of finding things to rebut and to respond to, which I also do, but also just because I want to learn more things. I want to see what areas I might be wrong in, and I'm always willing to be shown where I'm wrong. I used to be ardent fundamentalist Baptist, now I'm Catholic, and it started with me asking, how am I wrong? Maybe I'm wrong somewhere. And being willing to learn where I was wrong, that really helped me go that direction. And I want to stay that way. I want to see where I'm wrong, where I'm right, and what I can improve. And by doing that, I am able to watch atheist videos without feeling threatened, and also without being afraid of learning something. Sometimes I do learn things. I learn things about archaeology, history, biology that I didn't know before. And also, it's also a chance for me to see how much I already know and what the atheist gets wrong or misconstrues for their own sake. And I don't really like doing a whole lot of responses to response videos, and that's what this is. But he said a lot of things in this video that I thought were worth addressing. And so I just want to cover some of those things and try to keep it as short as possible and really only address the things that I feel like he went really out of his way on, as opposed to address the entire rebuttal that he does. Because I actually agree with him on a lot of things he says.
What is Christianity all about? What is the Bible all about? The Bible for many people is a great mystery. Every Bible has 66 books in it.
Well, right there, you're wrong. The Catholic Bible has 73 books. Some denominations have 80. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, sorry about the pronunciation, has 81.
This is true. I would go so far as to say that there's not a single Protestant denomination that has more than 66 books. And none of them have less either. They all use the 66-book Bible. Catholics do use the 73-book Bible, and various Orthodox denominations have, I shouldn't call them denominations, I should really call them jurisdictions or something along those lines, but they tend to have more like 80. Like he said, there's actually even more flexibility there. The Orthodox view biblical canon very differently than we do here in the West. I actually tend to think they have the right idea, but they're pretty flexible about what the correct number of books is. They'll agree with the Catholic canon. They'll allow that, but they will say the Protestants went too far in removing books. Unfortunately, the history behind where we got our books is pretty complicated as far as Orthodox and Catholics go, but they are in good terms as far as that goes. Protestants, on the other hand, think that their 66 books are God's revelation, and anything beyond that is just adding to the Bible, and according to them is a very grave sin. If you actually look at the history of why Protestant Bibles have the 66 books instead of more, we can thank partially Martin Luther. He moved a big section of the Old Testament to the back of the Bible and called them the Apocrypha, meaning he didn't believe they had the authority of God behind them. And then later, missionary companies, missionary tract printers, realized it's a lot cheaper to print 66 books of the Bible than 73 or more books of the Bible. So they started printing all their Bibles with 66 books. And that's what really locked in the 66 book number for Protestants. But before that, it was 73 books or more. And it might have to be another video where we talk about why certain books are in the Bible and other ones aren't. But that should be really all we know for this, need to know for this video.
So right out of the starting gate, what am I, a simple atheist, to make of this? The Bible is supposed to be God's word, his important communication to his creation, with the important message that he wants to impart to all of humanity. But not all churches that worship this God can even agree on how many books to include in this message from God.
But it's worth repeating. For the Orthodox, this is pretty much a non-issue. And for Catholics, it's also pretty much a non-issue. Catholics are much more rigid in what is canon than the Orthodox are. But as far as that goes, we tend to kind of have a mutual understanding. And the books that is considered canonical for an Orthodox Bible, as opposed to a Catholic Bible, Catholics still respect those books and have and hold them in high esteem, at least for the most part. whereas Protestants will reject them all outright and typically say we should not be reading them at all.
Why even are there different books? Could God not have written one book himself that is entirely cohesive and any human writings are obviously not to be included? But no, we're just left with this mess.
I think this is a fair question. And I think someone smarter than me could probably come up with a better analogy than this. But I tend to think of it as like if you're in high school English or in a college literature class, you're going to have a book that's usually an anthology of different writings. Like the Anthology of American Literature is a good example. It's one that I remember reading for college. And there's all kinds of different versions of that and all kinds of different books. Some of it is poetry, like from Emily Dickinson. Some of it is going to be like Walden. Some of it is going to be beat poets, like you have Howl in a lot of anthologies. But then you also have a lot of stories and novels. You'll find some Tom Sawyer in there, and you'll find maybe some letters from Puritans and different presidents, that sort of thing. It covers a wide range of topics, a wide range of literary styles, and they're not all to be read the same. An English professor could technically write one book that covers everything, and you don't need any other books or any examples. But then you don't really get the fullness of what's happening. So when you approach Emily Dickinson, for example, you're going to approach that very differently than you would a letter from a Puritan writing to someone back in England, or even someone in a village a few miles away. You're going to view one as actual history, and the other one exactly as it is, a bit of poetry. And when you have that, you have a full experience of American literature, rather than just someone describing American literature. So what Vice Rhino is asking for here is much more the Muslim approach. The ones who say that God gave the Jews the Torah, and they messed it up. Then God gave the New Testament to Christians, and they messed it up. And so, thankfully, he sent along Muhammad and gave him one book, clearly from God, unaltered over time. And that is the true word of God. And that's what Vice Rhino is asking for. But of course, he doesn't accept the Quran as an inspired holy book from God. It's just his way of throwing a wrench into the Christian apologetic. But if you approach it like the American literature example, you'll see that it makes a lot more sense than the way he described it as in just a jumble of books written by a bunch of people who had an agenda.
And there is one common thread, one common theme through all 66 books. The theme is Jesus Christ.
So, when Proverbs says, "Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock," that fits the Jesus theme?
I would actually say it does. And that is context, context, context. It actually doesn't come from the book of Proverbs, which is a book of wise sayings from Solomon and a few other writers. It actually comes from the book of Psalms, which is the Hebrew book of prayers and songs. And not all of them are good and positive and happy. Some of them are really angry, some are really sad, and some are really desperate. And usually all at the same time. This psalm really regards the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonians came, they destroyed Jerusalem, they sacked the temple, they kidnapped hundreds, if not thousands, of slaves out of Jerusalem. And the writer is very, very distraught about this. He's very upset. And this is him pouring out his emotions. And he says things that are, at least to our modern ears, terrible. And I'm sure that if you go back in time, those were terrible thoughts to have and things to say. But what it really shows you is that when we have those terrible moments and we think those terrible thoughts, we can go to God with them. Now, I know Vice Rhino doesn't believe in God. That's obviously the point of his whole video. But when you allow the Christian and the Jew even to use these texts within their context, it becomes much more clear what is happening. And when you are very upset, you say things out of emotion. And those emotions are okay to feel. And frankly, a lot of those things are okay to express to God. Because once you've done that, you've released what's inside of you. All that stuff that's boiling over, that can really cause a problem, it is now in someone else's hands, in God's hands. And that's going to be a really good thing. So yes, within that context, we can absolutely take those emotions and feelings to Jesus. It all points back to him.
Or how about the story of the Levite's concubine? That's the one that closely parallels Lot and his daughters. A Levite is traveling through the Benjaminite city of Gibeah, and after being invited into the home of an old man coming in from working in the fields, a mob of men who want to make sweet, sweet love to the Levite come to the house of the old man. To protect himself, he turns his concubine over to them, and this is where the stories diverge. Instead of refusing the concubine as the men of Sodom refused Lot's daughters, the men of Gibeah rape the concubine to death. The Levite then chops her body up into small pieces and sends the pieces to the other tribes of Israel, who together are outraged by what has happened, and so swear that none of them will give their daughters to a Benjaminite for marriage, and then they wage war against them, leaving only 600 men alive. At this point, they started feeling remorseful. They decided that they didn't want to completely eliminate one of Israel's tribes, but they had already killed all of the Benjaminite women and sworn oaths not to give their daughters to them for marriage. So how were they to keep this tribe alive? Well, obviously, the answer is to invade Jabesh-Gilead, one of the few towns that did not join in on the oath to never give their daughters to them, and kill all the men, women, and children except for the women who were virgins. And in doing so, they found 400 women to marry the surviving Benjaminites. But now there are still 200 wifeless Benjaminites. What of them? Well, obviously, they can kidnap wives out of the women who come out to dance at the feast being held at Shiloh, and if their fathers and brothers complain about it, we'll just tell them to be happy that we didn't destroy the whole town. And so the tribe of Benjamin was punished for raping a woman to death, and then the survivors were rewarded by being given kidnapped women as wives. Yup, that story clearly points to Jesus.
Now, I wanted him to get that whole story out and tell his perspective on it, because that's also fair. It's a really tough portion of the Bible. But going back to that anthology example that we had with the Psalm verse where he said, "Blessed are those who smash the heads of children against the rock," that is an example of poetry. You wouldn't read that the same way you would read something historical or prophecy or advice. It's a completely different category. This, on the other hand, is a historical account. Whether you reject that history or not doesn't change the literary style that it is written in, and it is written as history. And it's not written as history that is condoned by God or even by the person writing it. This is history as it happened, and it was terrible and it was messy, and we don't have to like it. We can say that was an evil, evil thing that happened. And all through the book of Judges, we see this pattern of evil things happening. And then God will take care of it. And the people turn away from God again, and they start doing evil stuff again. And this is like a 400-year period of just this cycle of evil following evil following evil. That doesn't mean God's okay with it. It does mean that these people were looking for an answer. If they weren't desperate for something, they wouldn't be turning to these evil things. And Jesus is the answer to that desperation.
But nowhere in the Bible will you find systematized arguments to try to prove God's existence.
Yeah, interesting that. You'd think that if God wanted people to actually believe in him, he might spend some time in his message going over how you can actually know that he exists. Either that, or he could just reveal himself to everyone on an individual basis.
Well, he does. He's revealed himself in some way, shape, or form to every culture across history. That's why religion exists, is because God revealed himself. And it definitely goes way, way beyond the idea of, oh, cavemen heard thunder and couldn't explain it, and they thought it must be the gods. It goes way beyond that. Because the further you go back in history, the more you see complicated theologies and stories surrounding the gods. And a lot of them parallel what you see in the Bible. A lot of atheists will say, well, the Bible ripped them off from other pagan cultures. And that is definitely something to respond to in a different video. But for now, it's worth saying that we see the repeated themes across cultures, across the world.
Yep, the Bible sure does claim that everyone has been given knowledge that the God of the Bible exists. The God of which Bible, you ask? Is it the 66-book Bible of most Protestant churches?
Yes.
The 73-book Bible of the Catholics?
Yes.
The 80 or 81-book Bibles of some other Protestant churches?
Also yes. And no. The no comes mostly from the fact that there's no Protestant group that uses 80 or 81 books. That's all Eastern Orthodox, which are completely different from Protestants.
How do I, as an atheist, decide which Bible is the right Bible?
You, as the atheist, do not get to decide which Bible is the right Bible. And most Protestants would tell you not to read a Bible with the Catholic books in it or with the Orthodox books in it, even though the Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant books that they have, they all overlap. They're all the same books. There's just more of them in the other denominations. But beyond that, Catholics and Orthodox alike would for sure tell you that if you want to grab a 66-book Bible and start reading that, do that. That has what you need to get started in your faith, in becoming a Christian. And we would all be happy to see you make that step, even if it is with a Protestant denomination, or I'm Catholic, so seeing you with an Orthodox denomination, I would be happy to see you make that change in your life. So if you're an atheist and you're watching this and you're thinking about picking up a Bible, any one of them will do.
Ultimately, we have to come to God by faith.
But if, deep down, we already know for certain that there is a God, is that really coming to God by faith? I know for certain that my kids exist. I would never use the word faith to describe my belief that they exist, because it is a demonstrable fact that they do exist. If we really did have certain knowledge of God's existence, as per Romans 1:20, then faith would not be required.
Fortunately, this pastor I've never heard of, nor Vice Rhino, get to define what faith actually is. And I'm going to go with the Catechism of the Catholic Church when it comes to faith. But the fact is, everyone is going to have faith to some degree. He just mentioned having kids. I have kids as well. When I wake up in the morning, I have faith that my kids are going to still be in their beds when I go in there and check on them. Or at least somewhere in the house, if they woke up before I did. Now, that doesn't mean that I've never seen my kids before. That doesn't mean that I don't know that my kids exist. It just means that I trust that my kids are going to be where I expect them to be. When I get into my car, and this is a more common example, I have faith that my car is going to start. Even though I don't empirically know it's going to start until I actually put the key in the ignition and turn it, I have that faith. I don't think about whether my car is going to start unless I've been having car problems. Same thing with my brakes. I'm going to trust my brakes are going to stop the car unless I've been having brake problems. And this is faith in action every single day in the lives of an atheist. Everyone has this faith. It doesn't have to be absolute knowledge, and it also doesn't have to be absolute lack of knowledge either, which is how he tries to define faith.
And I would argue very strenuously this morning that it takes more faith to believe in, let's say, evolution.
I'm going to go ahead and skip the whole evolution thing. I was a pretty staunch young earth creationist before. I'm not so much anymore. I probably still lean that way, but I can admit that might just be old bias hanging on to me. That said, God can design the world however he wants. God can use whatever mechanism that he wants, and it's not going to be a major issue for me.
I mean, you can't go to a nation of atheists.
Well, no, but that's because people are people, and some will be different from others as soon as you have a group of them. So pick any one single characteristic, and you won't be able to go to a country where all the people share that one characteristic. But there are plenty of countries where the majority of the population are atheist. In China, it could be as high as 90%, though I do have my doubts about the reliability of statistics out of a totalitarian regime. So, ignoring China, there's still some 23 countries with a 50% or higher level of non-belief among the population. So that's 23 countries of mostly atheist or agnostic people.
However, this was not historically true. This is actually a very, very recent development, entirely post-Enlightenment. And with some countries like China that he mentioned, these are countries that went from very, very rural third world countries to economic powerhouses in very short periods of time. and they had a lot of revolution and change happen in a country. And part of that was state control. And as we see in history, state control either uses God, abuses his name for power, or it gets rid of God to use its power. And getting rid of God for its own power is also a pretty recent development. So I would say the case is historically much, much more in favor of religion than it is in atheism.
The only thing that would even begin to kind of come close to that was the communist experiment through Soviet communism during the last century.
That boring old argument? Okay, here we go. Under those particular regimes, the state wanted to be the sole authority controlling the population. Religion was seen as competition for authoritative control, so it was a choice between using the church or trying to eliminate it. Plenty of nations throughout history have used religion as a tool for controlling people. The communists were really the first who tried to replace religion with a form of state worship rather than using religion itself to control people. So it wasn't about religion or the lack of religion, it was about controlling the population.
If they actually believed in God, they wouldn't try to do that. They wouldn't try to usurp God's authority with the state.
There's the argument of what we call the cosmological argument, that every cause has an effect. There's cause and effect. That's the cosmological argument. We look around at all the things, the effects of creation. We see all these things. There had to be something that caused all that is in our existence, all that we see.
Okay, and if I grant that all effects have a cause, which is what I think you're going for here, but you got it backward, then what caused God? Oh, God doesn't need a cause because he's the first cause? Okay, why is he exempt from the rule that all effects need a cause? Because special pleading, that's why.
It's weird that they accuse Christians of special pleading in this case, because they would literally make the same argument for the universe. However, the universe is contingent. It exists within space and time. It's contingent on something else. So God, who exists outside of space and time, wouldn't need a cause. He's not an effect. He is the first cause, as Aquinas argued it. So I don't know if it's an intentional misunderstanding of the argument and special pleading for his own case, but that is a much more accurate way to examine what he's saying.
Another argument that Aquinas gave us, which is very similar, is what he called the teleological argument. And that is this, that intelligent design presupposes a designer.
Wow, that was a garbage rephrasing. I can't believe I was ever impressed with this guy.
Can't believe it either. This guy's not very good at what he does.
Yes, intelligent design presupposes a designer. But now you're left with having to demonstrate intelligent design. Not just the superficial appearance of design, but that if you look closely enough, everything should appear to be designed with some sort of intelligence behind it.
There's some decent intelligent design arguments. Michael Behe, William Dembski are a couple names that I can think of right off the top of my head who did specialize in intelligent design, and they've worked with various theists across different religious beliefs in making these arguments. But also, not everything needs to be designed. When you don't reject evolution altogether, and especially if you take the milder form of what they usually call adaptation, it becomes pretty easy to see that not everything has to be specifically designed.
If there is a God, and God designed the universe specifically to create stars as we have them, then maybe those stars are evidence of that intelligent design, and life on planets orbiting these stars is just a byproduct of that design. If, however, God designed the whole universe so that he could just make humans, then the design is not very intelligent, whether you're looking at the universe as a whole or as humans specifically.
I disagree, but even if I would grant all that, it doesn't change anything. I'm not going to presume to know what else God created or what other purposes God had.
I know from experience, though, and you've probably guessed from his jab at evolution, that he is a young Earth creationist, and from that context, he appears to be using the teleological argument as evidence against evolution, rather than just as evidence for a specific or even a general God. This amounts to the tornado in a junkyard argument, and that whole argument is debunked simply by pointing out that living organisms reproduce, and there is variation among their offspring.
Well, before you can have biological variation, you need to have biological life. And the odds of just getting the proteins lined up correctly to even have life as a possibility are so astronomical, let alone the amino acids assembling correctly to make those proteins, which makes it even more astronomical. I'm actually going to take my chances with the junkyard.
If our morality comes from a source like God that wants us to all have a moral code that matches with theirs, then why is it that moral codes are different depending on the morality of the societies in which a person grows up? And why is there variation within each society? And why is it that, while most societies can all agree on some of the larger items, there is often great disagreement among members of the society about the smaller items that aren't quite as drastic, but have more of an impact on our day-to-day lives?
Right, there is usually agreement on the big stuff and disagreement on the little stuff. And we can look at, I mean, the easy one, the fish in the barrel is Hitler, right? We can all agree that genocide there is wrong. But we can also look at the ancient natives in South America and say that sacrificing 400 people in a day to appease the gods was not a good thing. We can objectively say that was wrong. But as far as little variances go, it seems like people actually have the same objective. Republicans and Democrats, liberal, conservative, it doesn't really matter. They all agree more than they think. What they disagree on is the best means of achieving something. So let's take coronavirus, for example. Conservatives want to maximize human well-being by having a strong economy, by keeping the food flowing, keeping water flowing, keeping the trucks moving, whereas Democrats are going to lean more towards we should shut things down, we should wear masks, we need to keep everything locked up for as long as we can to save as many lives as we can. Both sides want to maximize that human well-being, they just disagree on how to do it. But the fact is, God made us to care for each other. And because we care for each other, we want to do the right thing. And unfortunately in America, especially, it's gotten really, really ugly. But if we understood that we're both on the same side as far as wanting to find a solution, maybe we could be a little bit more patient with understanding the other side.
And why does morality have to come from some outside source in the first place? It's pretty apparent just by looking at different cultures that their moralities can sometimes be quite different. This is perfectly explained in naturalistic terms, but leaves one wondering why God gave different cultures different morals if we're looking at God as the ultimate source of all morality.
Argue that he didn't. That all cultures do have the same morality. But morality tends to cycle. The more free time a culture has, the more loose its morals seem to become. But on the opposite end, the more desperate people are, the less moral they seem to be, the more loose they seem to become. In between those two extremes, that's when we tend to have the most what's considered traditionally conservative, family-oriented, moral societies. And that's not to get into an argument about sexual morality or anything like that, even though that's exactly what I was thinking of. But yes, it's during the times where it's in between those two extremes where we see families function at their best and we see countries function at their best.
There are 5 major worldviews out there that we have an option to believe in. There's Islam. They worship the Quran and Muhammad. And there's Judaism. The Jewish people have not received Christ as their Messiah, do not believe that he is the Messiah. There is the worldview of naturalism, which would embrace atheism, communism, agnosticism. There is the Eastern worldview of pantheism, which would be Hinduism and Buddhism. And then there's Christianity.
Wow. Wow. Go back to the false dichotomy. It's more accurate than that by a lot. There are more than 5 worldviews in Judaism alone. Hell, if we count each denomination of a religion as a worldview, then there's literally thousands of different Christian worldviews. Are you trying to tell me that all Christians share worldviews? You wouldn't have any worldview differences with a Christian who is, say, LGBTQ affirming? Or accepts evolution? And what about naturalism? There are people from all the other worldviews that you listed that would identify with a naturalist worldview, but you lumped that in with atheism and communism.
This pastor really doesn't know what he's talking about. If he does, he's articulating it terribly right now. But I'm pretty sure he's going off notes based on the video here. So he must be saying exactly what he means to be saying. But just for a point of clarification, for my sake, for my sanity, there can be different levels of worldview, and there can be a lot of overlap in worldview. There can be a lot of divergence in worldview. No, not every Christian denomination has a brand new worldview. Obviously not. Maybe a better way to look at it is, I would argue against an Orthodox about papal authority, but I would join hands with that Orthodox believer in arguing for the real presence of Jesus in the bread and wine with the Protestant. But then I would join the Protestant in arguing against a Muslim that Jesus Christ is, in fact, the second person of the Trinity. Then I could join the Muslim to argue against the atheists that God does indeed exist. And I could even join some atheists who say are opposed to abortion.
I believe the faith that gives the most satisfactory answers to who am I, where am I going, why do I exist, I believe that the Bible alone gives us the most satisfactory answers to those questions.
He seems to be making his worldview decisions in life based on a thought process that can easily lead to the position that fundamentalist Christians like him always oppose. The idea that different and competing worldviews can be true for different people. That's your truth, so that's fine for you, but my truth is something different. That's the kind of thing you end up at if we're just looking for which worldview has answers that make us feel the most satisfied. Different people will be satisfied by different answers.
This is where he ends this video. He has a part 2 that I have not reviewed yet. I'll probably watch that, and if I think it's worth the time, I will make a response to that. If I don't think he says anything new or exciting, then I'll just move on to another atheist video to discuss, or maybe a different topic altogether. Protestants or just world events. We'll see what comes up. But I just want to end on this note that he says something I agree with. We can't just go with what we think fits best. Oh, Christianity seems to answer these questions that I have the best, therefore Christianity must be true. That just gives you motivation to why you wish Christianity to be true, but it doesn't actually fulfill any necessity of being true. And so I'll agree with him on that. Just because we like something or dislike something, that is not a good reason to accept or reject it. We need to reject it on its own merits. That said, if you liked the video, go ahead and like and subscribe. If you did not like it, go ahead and give me the thumbs down. Just let me know why in the comments. Most likely it's going to be because you disagreed with me, and I get it, but hopefully you are giving me an honest listen. And if you have any resources to point me to, feel free to do that. And remember, go to Mass.